All right, so I'm going to create here outside of public directory. I'm going to create a little lectures directory, right, because we're going to be working, we're going to be playing around with the database, but not necessarily inside of a web application, right? We're just going to be holding off that for a minute. I'm just going to show you how to work with Mongo and mongoose. Now, I believe I've already declared mongoose to be a dependency for this project, and there it is. Indeed, it is. But if it wouldn't be, you could very easily install it from the terminal. Right? From the terminal, you can say npm install mongoose, and don't forget the -- save. Just download the latest libraries for mongoose, install it, and declare it here as a dependency. Yes? So now the libraries for the mongoose implementation are now in my node modules. So now from within my lectures, I can create a JavaScript file here. I'll call it mongoose.js, which right now it's empty. There's nothing in there. And for now, just to see that we can run it, I'm just going to do a console log hello world, or hello from mongoose. Okay? So from my terminal, which I can't make it big. Why can't I? Okay, whatever. I can go into that directory, lectures, and I see that I have mongoose.js in there. I can run it by just saying node.mongoose. Right? It's just a JavaScript file running node on it. It just executes that JavaScript. And that's all really what Node.js is, right? Node.js is just a JavaScript interpreted for the desktop, right? And there it is. It's just executed on my desktop. Okay. All right. So let's do a couple more things. Let's copy from the example here. Let's copy from here, and let's paste it in our mongoose here. Let's there it is. All right, can I move this terminal? Can I move it to the right? Pin, move to the right. There we go. Okay, clear? Okay. Actually, that's way too small. Maybe I can use this over here. There we go. I'll use that instead. And this I'll need to go into webdev, into NU, into webdev. Let's see, where is it? CD 2017 maybe? Summer 2. Oops. CD Summer 2. And must be here. And must be in... Oh, where is it? Why don't I see it here? Am I in the right place? Summer 2, WebDev Northeastern. WebDev Northeastern. Oh, maybe I'm in the wrong branch. Let's see. Git checkout. And this is 2017 Summer 2, maybe? Oh, I'm already there. Do you see lectures here? Oh, it is. I'm blind. There we go, mongoose. So I can do node and then mongoose. There we go. Hello from mongoose. We're there, right? So now you can see when I type. Maybe. All right. So we have on the left-hand side we have our code. We are going to connect to the local host, meaning my machine here, to a database test. Okay. I'm trying to make this easier for you to read, to look at it when I record it. Okay. So this connects me to the database. Once I'm connected to the database, I can use the connection. I can store the connection in a local variable, right? Once I have the connection, I can use it to interact with the database, right? So let's create, for instance, one of the main ways to interact with the database is that I need to create an object that will allow me to store data in there, right? So to do that, first we'll need to describe that object. So for instance, let's create a schema for a user. So let's create a user schema. And we can describe a schema by using one of Mongoose's methods called schema. And the schema takes in as argument the properties that describe that user. So a user might have a username, right, and has a string, which is a string. It might have a first name, which is also a string. Last name, a string. Date of birth might be a date. Okay? Make sense? Right? Now, some of these you might want to specify default values. Right? So, for instance, you might say that, how about created? The day that this record was created. Well, I would want that to be a date, certainly, a timestamp, yes. But it's kind of inconvenient that the application would need to create this object. Instead, it would be great if this could give me a default value, yes? So to do that, when you declare the data types of each one of these properties, you can also provide additional meta information. Right? So to do that, optionally, this could be, instead of a data type, this could be an object. In the object, you can describe many things, right? Well, certainly we need the type. Right? We need to know that at least it's a date. But in addition, you can create other things. You can say that the default value is something. Okay? For instance, one of the things that you can specify here is a function to be used to calculate this value. Right? Meaning I can provide a function that it will call, right, and it will provide a value for this. Well, luckily there is already a function in JavaScript, right, that calculates the current date. Right? Date.now is a function that, when called, it comes back, returns the current date. Yes? So when it will insert this, it'll try to insert this record, it will take for created the current date when it was created, when this record was created. Make sense? This one, it won't create it for me. I will have to create it. Right? Last name, first name, a username. How about status? You can say maybe this is a dating service. So this is also it could be a string. And now it's also a string. Now this status and this first name, there's no difference here, right? There's just two ways of saying the same thing. But because I've used this syntax here, I can say other things. Okay. One of the things that I could say is that I can give it an enumerated set of values that are the only valid values for this status. Right? You could say that married, single. Right? If I try to give it something else other than these two strings, the mongoose library is going to balk and not going to let me insert or update. Something that MongoDB on its own won't do. Okay? What Mongoose buys us, the library Mongoose buys us, is one is the schema. Right? MongoDB doesn't know anything about schemas, but Mongoose does. When we try to insert something, and we try to perhaps add another attribute here that is not listed, maybe we forgot and we used first name instead of first. Yes? Well, Mongoose is going to stop us. It's not going to let us insert that document. Right? Which is what schemas are all about. Right? Validating, making sure that the data is correct. That's not letting us enter wrong things that misrepresent the data structure. Make sense? Okay. So now that I have a schema, I can create now an object that's going to allow me to create these things, find these things, right? Retrieve them, delete them, update them, right? To do that, we use Mongoose model. Right? The model is going to encapsulate all the functionality that will allow us to interact with these pieces of data. Okay? Today we'll need to record and register this as a brand new model with the Mongoose infrastructure. We need to give it a unique identifier. It's very common to use the name of the entity followed by the keyword model. But really, you could do whatever you want. You could give it any name as long as it's unique. You can't register the same name twice. Okay? So here it is, user model. And then you need to give it what the schema is. Now user model can be used to create these things, delete them, update them, insert them, find them. Right? This provides the same functions that create, insert. Create is the same as insert that we saw in Mongo, in the Mongo command line interface. Right? Create will allow me to create new instances of a user. I can give it a JSON object with a username Alice. Let's just do Alice. Okay, and we can provide as a second argument here a callback function. This is going to be an asynchronous call. Right? This create function is going to do a network connection to a database. Right? To a database that could be down, right? Or it could take too long. So the single thread, right, can't stop waiting for that to happen. Instead, it's going to issue the create insert a command, and it's not going to wait for the answer, for the response from the server. Right? Instead, the second argument to the create function allows us to register a callback function. Right? When you're done, notify me, come back, right? And let me know if it went well. This function will be called by Mongoose when the server responds. And it will pass me meta information telling me whether there was an error, or if there was no error, it'll pass me the actual object that was inserted into a database. Okay? And so we're going to do, if there's an error, we're going to do console log error. Or else, if there was no error, we're going to console log the document that was inserted. Yes? All right, so let's try it. Let's try here. Let's run it. Node mongoose. There it is. There's my object that was inserted. And notice that it has the username Alice. It has the underscore ID property that was created by Mongo. We didn't create that. And the created timestamp that we set to please create it for us, right? We gave it a default. It used the date.now function to provide a default value for that field. Make sense? I can connect to the database in another tab, maybe. and show DBs. I think we're using the test database, right? So I can go into use test, show collections, and the one here, there's way too many. Let's use another database. How's that? Let me go back here. Instead of tests, we'll call it about webdev, summer 2. I think that's what I called it. I forget. 2017. Let's run that again. Okay. Let's connect here, and we'll say use that database, show collections. There it is. That's the user model, right? If we say db.userModels find, indeed we have the object we had created there. This is my Alice when it was created, right, and the ID. See that? So it did make it into a database. Now, but notice the name that it chose for us. User models, all lowercase, right? Why did it choose that name for our collection? Well, it's using the name that we gave it here, right? User model. It did lowercase. Actually, if we would have chosen user. If we would have chosen user, let's see what happens. And let's insert again. If we show the collections, notice what it did. Okay, it chose for us, for the name, users. Right? Notice that it tends to put an S at the end. See that? Right? It takes the name of the model that we gave it, user, even though it's singular, right? It pluralizes it. What happens if I do something that has no plural? Let's run it and show the collections. Fish. So it knows that fish has no plural. Okay. So it has a dictionary, right, of words and their pluralization. But I don't really like, my mongoose choosing these names for me. So instead, you can override that and specify exactly what you want to call your collections, right? By specifying it in the schema. In the schema, when you describe the schema, you can tell it what the name of the collection you want to use, right? I'm going to go with just plain old user. No pluralization, right? Because languages are not consistent in their pluralizations, and I don't want to have to remember that certain words are pluralized one way and certain words are pluralized some other way. So instead, I'm going to standardize and do the convention that I will not pluralize anything. Make sense? It's a sensible convention. So everything is just plain old singular. So if I do that, even though I called it fish, let me drop everything. db.fish.drop. Okay, I dropped it, so it's not there anymore. Let me drop all of these. db.userModels.drop. So they're all gone. And finally, users. Drop it. So there are no collections. Okay. So I called it user, but notice I called it's fish, right? So if I run this, and then I show the collection, notice that it uses user. It's the collection that I tell it. Okay, even though it's registered in the rest of the framework is registered as fish. Right. So this allows you to call it this something else, user model, And this is only for you to understand that that's its role, right? It's a model, but the collection is stored in collection name user. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So there's create. Typically, these functions we don't want to call them directly. Instead, we want to put them inside of a function, a reusable function. Okay, that might be called something like create user that takes as argument a user object, right? And then which internally it uses the create function and you pass it the user object. Yes? Now it's reusable and it's at a higher level. You see that? We're creating kind of like an API. Right? This is a good practice that instead of calling directly the underlying database API, you wrap it inside of a function that that hides the implementation. If tomorrow I want to change this to be a SQL database, or I want to do Postgre, or I want to do file, or I want to store it over the network to MLab or whatever, right? I can just replace this with the code, yes? But everybody else who's using create user would be unaffected. Yes? So I can call the create function. I can create now Bob, username Bob. Right? And so I can run this. I can run it, and there's Bob. Show collections, and you say db.user.find.pretty. I see Bob and Alice are there. Everybody good? All right. So yeah, so I have a reusable function there. So same thing, now I can try out maybe find all users. If I want to find all users, well, I'll wrap the functionality inside of a function, find all users. Right? Implement it maybe down here. Function find all users. And find all users, it'll use the user model that we had earlier, and we're going to call find on it. Isn't that what find does? Right? It retrieves all the instances, right? And we're going to register here a function that is going to come back with either an error or all the documents. And we're going to spit out console log documents. Yes? Spit out that. Let's run that. There it is. So it came back with an array. See that, the array? Came back with an array of 2 objects in there. Yes? Now, typically these functions, you might want to call these functions and assign them to something. Right? Typically that's what you would want to do, correct? Right? So, it'd be nice if these functions, instead of taking these arguments like this, it'd be great if you could do like a return. Yes? Let's see what happens here. If we do a console log users, what would this print? And if I run this, notice what it prints out. Not what we were expecting. Right? We were expecting the array of users. Right? Instead, it's giving us quite a bit of things, right? It's giving us a mongoose object. It's giving us a mongoose object. That mongoose object behaves very similarly to something that we've seen before. This is not an array of users at all. It's a promise. It's the same issue that we did when we were from Angular trying to hit a server. Yes? They were asynchronous communication, it wasn't coming back immediately. Instead, it was giving us a promise that at some point, a little later, I'll give you the data. Right? So this promise, you could do the same thing we did in earlier, right? You'd say then and register a function with a callback. So instead of having the callback nested all the way in there, right, we could have it out here, right? In here, if I put it in here, there's nothing I could do in there, right? The code would be inside of a function that I would want it to be reusable, right? Instead, I want it out here, right? I want the data to come back right here. So this function, it comes back with the actual data from the database users, and then we can do console log users. All right, so we run that. We're back where we were. See that? It came back, and I have it available in that callback. Yes? Right? Now, this syntax can actually be collapsed into the following. Right? We can remove that promise. We see that find all users already returns that promise. So we could string these together like this. We could string it together like that and do away with the promise altogether. See that? This is a very common way of writing it. Okay. Find all users, and then once it comes back, I will do this. Right? So let's run that. And there's my array. Everybody okay? Yes? And I can have all sorts of finder methods. Let's comment that out for a second. Another finder method that is very common or very useful is a find by some attribute. Right? Find by username. Right? That takes as arguments Alice, maybe the name of some object in there. And then it comes back with a user instance, and we display it. Console log user. So let's implement that. Over here would be function find user by username. Takes as argument username. So it's the same user model dot find, but it takes as argument a filter, right? Whose username attribute matches the username parameter that is being passed along. Yes? And it returns a promise. It returns a promise that is meant to be passed and returned to the find by username. Right? So let's do that. Right? It didn't work. What? Did I misspell it? Find. Oh, this should be find user by username. That's why. There it is. It returned Alice. But notice it returned Alice as an array, even though we know that the username is a key, right? Maybe not the primary key, but it's a key. Right? It uniquely identifies this, right? So if we know for certain that there's only one of these that could possibly match, yes, there is another version of find. There's another version of find that allows us to return just one, the very first one that matches. Right? So instead of find, there is find one. Find one just returns the very first one that matches. And if this is a key, well, that was the only one that matched. So the first one is the only one, which is perfect, right? So we know that username is a key. So if we run this again, notice that instead of returning an array, it returns just that one instance. Make sense? Right? Just yet another one I like to run by you. Another one is find user by ID. That's another one, very common one, that you provide some ID, some unique identifier, and then you do whatever you want with the response, the user. So let's take from the database an ID. There it is, an ID. Right? I can pass that as an argument, and we'd like to implement that. So how do we implement that? So here's my find user by ID, which takes the ID, and it's going to do a return user model dot find by ID. Well, I could use just find, right? And the filter is underscore ID matches the ID. That would work just well, right? If we run that, notice that it returns an array of objects, right? And it's that one, Alice, that matches. Since I know it's 1, then I'll put a 1 there. Yes? Right? And indeed, I return just 1. There it is, that one object. But this is such a common operation that Mongoose went ahead and created a find by ID. That just takes as argument the ID parameter. Okay, which is a blend of both. It's a find one where the ID is that, right? It's a syntactic sugar. Right? It just expands it, makes it easier. It's only for convenience purposes. And indeed, it just returns that one element by ID. Everybody okay? All right. All right, there's finders. I'm just going to move these down further so that we can easier. So another one is remove. I want to be able to remove elements from my database. And right now we have Bob and Alice. So before removing, let's change something. Let's do update user, right? And typically, an update function, typically what it is that it should take as argument some ID of the object that or the entity instance that you want to update, and then new values, right? We could change the, well, let's leave the username. Instead, let's add first, we'll say Alice, last Wonderland. Right, and to implement that, let's implement the function here. Function update user takes as argument user ID and takes as the user instance, right? The new user. So this is new user. New user values, I guess, values. Now the way you would implement that is that you would return a promise. You would use user model update. So this is the raw update function of Mongoose. You have a filter here saying that I only want to update the user whose ID matches the user ID, and I want to set what I want to set. Well, in this case, I only have the first. That's going to be equal to what? To new user values dot first or last new user values new user values dot last. So I'm passing the second argument to this is what? What is that? It's an object that has all the properties that I want to change. Yes? And it has all the new values that I want to set them to. Correct? But wait a minute. Isn't this object the same as this object right here? Isn't it the same exact, right? And isn't that object just new user values? So I could just take this and save myself and just say new user values. That's it. Right? You would only do this if you want to, individually do something to each individual element. Right? If you want to do some manipulation, maybe scrub the data, right? Before you insert it. maybe do some manipulation of the data before you insert it, right? Or maybe you want to add something here, date of birth, new date, something, I don't know. Okay, so it doesn't match exactly, right, because you're adding fields, or maybe you're removing fields. Maybe you want to remove a field. Maybe you don't want to change the password, right? It's passing you a new password, but you don't necessarily want to change it. Okay, so this would work fine. Let's see if it updates. If we do a fine, a pretty, it didn't work. Wait, what? Oh, we don't have a promise function. So here in the promise, it comes back with a status information. It doesn't come back with a document, the data. It comes back with a status information telling me if it was successful, how many records were modified, right? How many matched and whatnot. And so we can do a console here, console log status. So let's run. So there it is. Notice we're printing out the status saying, yep, it matched one document and one was modified successfully. And if we go to Mongo, notice that indeed we were able to modify the first name, right, and the last name, and plus we were able to add a date of birth in there. Yes? Everybody okay? And lastly, let's do remove. And so here would be something like, we would like to be able to remove user, and we would like to pass in typically an ID of the user we want to remove. So let's remove Bob. And then with a function and a status information of how many records were removed, we'll do console.log status and remove it. So this would be implemented as remove user with a user ID. And this would be using the user model dot remove, and remove only one that matches the ID with the user ID that I am passing you as argument. Oh, oops. Oh. Why did I do that? What's the database called? That's all right. Use that. No, I mean use that. Show collections. db.user.find.pretty. There we go. All right, so let's come in here and let's now run the delete. Oops, something not good. Oh yeah, no, there it is. It returned the status. Let's see if it removed it. Indeed, Bob is gone. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to write similar code. We'll put this in a separate schema file, and we'll put all the functionality that allows me to manipulate the user, right, into a separate model file, JavaScript file, right? And this will allow me to, from anywhere I want, manipulate, insert, delete, remove. We'll create an API around this so that it can be reused elsewhere, okay, all throughout our application. All right, and we'll do that next.